The Gray Zone, an independent news outlet, has participated in a Nord Stream expedition and reportedly discovered a clue that was missed by Swedish investigators. Near one of the sites of the blast in September of 2022, the team discovered a diving boot used by U.S. Navy divers. One of the Gray Zone reporters watched a live stream from a drone that was underwater while he was on a ship in the Baltic Sea, and a black and orange diver's boot showed up on the screen, the Gray Zone reports.
Now, according to the Gray Zone, a model that closely resembles this boot is used by U.S. Navy and commercial divers, and Ukrainian Navy divers have also reportedly been spotted wearing similar boots. It's great that the U.S. is sharing all its gear with Ukraine. The boot was previously reported to investigators, but was not collected, and knowledge of it was not made public, according to the Gray Zone. Now, editor-in-chief of the Gray Zone, Max Blumenthal, joins us to discuss. Welcome, Max.
Thanks for having me.
What is the significance of this discovery? Lay it out for us.
Well, this is not the only discovery that's been made by this expedition. This is just the first in what will likely be a multi-part investigation. A small expedition on a boat called the Baltic Explorer, led by a Swedish engineer named Erik Andersson, embarked to the sites of the Nord Stream pipelines. I believe it's the first independent expedition to the blast sites where $23 billion pipelines were blown up in the worst act of industrial sabotage, severing Germany from its supply of cheap energy from Russia in an obvious attack on both Russia and Germany. And we managed at the Gray Zone to get a reporter on that boat, to get him a seat on that boat. His name is Jeffrey Brodsky. And they sent drones underwater at the blast sites and found, among other things, a boot. It is a diver's boot, an outer boot. We confirmed it to be a Thor outer boot. This is a boot that has been seen in use by U.S. Navy divers. A similar boot called the Viking has also been seen in use. Ukrainian divers have been seen with similar boots. It has also been used by commercial divers, especially in contaminated areas. And so we determined that this was a clue that should at least be looked at. We're committed to getting all the evidence out there because the investigations, the official investigations by Sweden, for example, have not made their findings public, and it's been 8 months. So we've learned that Nord Stream 2, the company that owns these destroyed pipelines, had actually reported the boot to Swedish investigators. We also learned through a source that Swedish divers had never even visited this site, so it can't be one of their boots. But the question is, why didn't the Swedish investigative team show any interest in this? Are they even interested in learning who the perpetrators are? It's sort of seems like a major oversight.
Yeah, I can definitely see someone making the case that multiple types of people of various national origins have access to these boots, that there is reporting at this point that it could have been, Ukrainian nationals, although there's still a denial that the Ukrainian government was involved. And so the boot is not that much of a red flag, except for it is interesting finding out that there was knowledge of the boot, but a failure to disclose the boot, which really does raise the question, what else might not have been disclosed and how thorough were these investigations that we're supposed to be relying on as having, cleared the U.S. from being involved? So what else? First of all, I would love to hear a little bit more about how you gained access to this expedition, and also anything else that you learned that you think might be more significant than the discovery of the boot in and of itself.
Well, the engineer, Erik Andersson, gained access through permits by notifying Swedish and Danish maritime authorities about the expedition, and he gained the relevant permits through the Swedish Defense Authority, which also raises questions about why no one else bothered to do this. He then sent drones underwater and filmed the blast sites. And so I think there's more coming. Hopefully there will be more coming with expert analysis on the size of the blasts, how much explosives were possibly used, the placement of the explosives, and this will be highly relevant to making an attribution about who the perpetrators are. And right now, in my view, the most likely perpetrator is the United States, as put forward by Seymour Hersh, who speculated that massive amounts of some kind of C4 explosives were planted in the mud below the pipelines by U.S. Navy divers in coordination with Norway. And this attack was celebrated by everyone from Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland to Secretary of State Tony Blinken, who called it a major economic opportunity. The U.S. liquid natural gas industry is celebrating this enormously. So they seem to be the most likely perpetrators. As you said, Ukrainians are also suspected. But what's important here is that the whole media, with so much more resources than us, has neglected to do this. And the official investigators have kept their findings from the public and are not scraping up these clues from the ocean floor. When we came across the boot with the drone, it almost seemed absurd that it was there. And then even more absurd that no one had bothered to collect it and examine it. So let's let this play out. And hopefully this will actually force the official investigators to actually do some work. The problem is they might wind up biting the hand that feeds them as members of NATO. Pointing the finger at the U.S. seems to be off limits for these vassal states.
The mainstream media has been slowly pivoting away from, oh, why would Russia do this? Realizing that made no sense, to a kind of, well, I guess we'll never know. It's a mystery, but who really cares? Is it that important? Do you predict any kind of revisiting of that approach, in the face of mounting evidence that the statements by U.S. officials that, not just celebrating it after it happened, but predicting that something like this would occur, a vague kind of menacing threat that something like this would occur.
Right.
When does that combination of all those factors draw some mainstream attention?
Yeah, especially from the German mainstream media. I mean, it's their economy that's on the chopping block here, and they don't really have an economic plan B. So where is the outrage? Why are German officials so circumspect, if not reticent, about the worst act of industrial sabotage attacking their critical infrastructure? And so that's why I think this independent expedition is so necessary in forcing the issue, in gathering as many clues as possible, even in examining, hopefully in examining and possibly determining what type of explosive was used to make an attribution, because we can no longer trust even the target of this attack, the German government or the German media that seems to be acting as its lackey. We can't trust them. So independent media means going out there, gathering clues, gathering evidence, and putting it out there for experts to analyze. And this was just the first step towards, I think, in a much longer process in examining something that should never, ever have been allowed to happen in the so-called rules-based order put forward by Tony Blinken. It kind of makes it clear that the Biden administration is saying, we make the rules and you follow our orders.
Yeah, well, just one last question from me. Is there any commentary from diving experts or the like who could explain why it is that a boot would become dislodged, if there would be any implications for, I don't know, pressurized suits in a deep dive or anything like that, that would help to explain how something like this happened? Is it more likely that a boot just got knocked off a boat? How does a diving boot end up near the scene in the first place?
Well, I can see a lot of the pro-Ukrainian trolls are accusing us of planting the boot. But things happen. It was found very close to a blast site. Northern Diver, the manufacturer of the Thor overboot, has essentially confirmed that it is theirs. And they do sell to militaries as well as commercial divers. And I'm looking forward to the diving community debating this. But prior to us putting this out, there was no such debate. And that's the fault of the official investigators who are keeping the facts from the public in order to apparently sweep this attack under the ocean floor.
An unlikely Cinderella story here. Thanks for joining us to discuss,
Maybe
Max.
an unlikely Little Mermaid story.
All right, we'll have more Rising for you right after this.